Welcome to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with glass blower Gary Bodker. Hope you enjoy.
Hey.
Yo.
How you doing?
Good, I'm good, man. How you?
Good. Been a while.
It's been a long time.
So what's up?
Yeah. So you're still in Portland, huh? You're living it.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm married. I got a kid. He's almost 4, actually.
Really?
Yeah. It's wild.
Did you forge him out of glass?
He loves the glass shop. He talks about it all the time.
Really?
He tells everybody. I take him to shows. I do retail shows. I do retail shows and wholesale shows, but like the retail shows, he'll like grab the glass and hey, this is my daddy's glass. This is my daddy's glass, and he sells it pretty well. I mean, people love him. He's like this just adorable, half Japanese, half white, wild thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine that. Does he have orange dreadlocks too? He has my hair, but like he looks like my wife, and so he's fascinating.
But I still have my dreadlocks too. I mean, I don't have them on my head, but
you have them in a box or something?
No, I have them in a hat. I hot glued them into a hat, and they live inside of a locker at the shops for people to wear.
Oh, that's cool. Like your employees?
Yeah.
How many employees you got?
Well, we're at like 2.5. I just lost one. Today's his last day, actually. But it's okay. We're going into the slow season, so I'll pick up another 1.5 come August.
What is the seasons of glass? I don't know anything about this business.
Well, so it's, it wouldn't not necessarily the seasons of glass, but it's like the retail season. So sales are, the fourth quarter, right? September through the beginning of December is the best for retail sales. So that's when most small businesses make the majority of their sales. When you make things like I do, which are giftable decor, right? And then so that's like the busiest time. The slower times are like January, February, and then maybe like June, July. So like the holiday season starts to pick up in August, and there's also trade shows. So I go to 2 trade shows, one in February, one in August, and that kind of keeps my wholesale business going year round. But most people, when they order in February, or when people buy stuff in like the earlier part of the year, they're buying for holidays. So like Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, Father's Day. And then there's really nothing right after Mother's Day, which is in a couple weeks. There's really nothing in June and July. It's kind of like everybody wants to get outside. People aren't in their homes as much. And then, True. So they're not like thinking like, oh, what I need right now is this bud vase for, to really tie the whole room together. And then, come August, we'll go back to the trade shows, take orders for the holidays. And that's the big push. And that's unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, however you look at it, that's like where most businesses like mine make money. Whereas the rest of the year, we're just kind of surviving.
Yeah. I remember the last time we saw each other in Portland at that bizarre show. You were talking about something about how like you were on some tip about performance art as glass or something, but not traditional glass maker. Does that sound right? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so, I'm assuming you don't feel that same way at this point, or?
No, I still love the performative aspect of it, but it's definitely like the art has taken a backseat to the business at this point in my life. Just the way things go when you have to support a family, it's hard to focus on some of the things that don't necessarily consistently bring in money. But like in college, I went to art school, I went to Rhode Island School of Design, in the glass department, where it was a conceptual sculpture department with a glass shop. Mm-hmm. So there was a small focus on glass making, but it was more about the conceptual qualities of glass, and the things that we were kind of pushed to make were conceptual sculptures and didn't necessarily have anything to do with glass. And so, I might be one of the only ones left from my graduating class that still does anything with glass. But going through that program, it made me think about the qualities of glass. And I got really interested in making like installations using like light and like the idea of like an immersive experience and how you can like make people understand, kind of slow down time and like understand how their normal everyday life could be more interesting by highlighting certain things. Mm-hmm. And so like one of my projects was like I created this long walkway with these like troughs of water on the side, but like the walkway that I created was really janky, and it on purpose. It was supposed to be bouncy, like an unsupported floor, and then under these troughs of water were these lights that projected onto the walls that I built. And so when people would walk through, every step, depending on how hard or fast or slow they were walking, would bounce the floor differently, which would resonate the water differently, which would make these lines of light kind of shake differently, and to make you realize like, oh, like my little actions can have these bigger consequences or bigger responses. And from there, I kind of moved on to this. I was trying to like just kind of slow down people's perceptions, right? Like kind of stop time. And so I thought about like making, how could I like capture an explosion, right? So I wanted like, because an explosion is this instantaneous thing that you witness the destruction, but you can't really witness the explosion itself, right? Like it's just so fast. So I was like, how could we freeze that in glass? And glass has these properties of being molten, and then all of a sudden it's frozen and you can't do anything with it. And it has the property of being translucent. So, you can see inside of it. So it's like, oh, what if we put an explosive inside of glass, freeze it in this, and so over like experiments, like I started throwing fireworks inside of these glass vessels and creating these explosions inside of these glass vessels. And it became this performance, which got picked up by a couple people. And like right after college, so this is 2009, 2010, it was in a few shows, and it got like, it was like in the art world, and it was definitely something I could have pursued, I think. And like there was a video of it, and then like people wanted me to do performances of this like live, and there's like the glass conferences that people wanted me to do it at. And I think it was starting to transcend out of the glass world, which is, I think, more ideal than just like being insulated inside of this small, weird community that is the glass world. And it was definitely fun and interesting. And like the ideas, I think, are still somewhere in my brain about it. But I also really enjoyed glass making. The reason I went into glass making, actually, so I don't know if you remember in high school, like I was doing like the computer aided design stuff, right? I was in the architecture class for all 4 years of high school. And like the only art class I ever took was the one that we were in together, which was right. I don't know. It was my senior year, I think, in your whatever sophomore year or something. But like art was never like a thing for me. It was more about design and craft, I think. And so I went to school for architecture originally. So I went to Tulane University down in New Orleans, right? That's where I was going to go. I moved in. Hurricane Katrina hit the day I moved in to the dorm. And so we had to leave. And then they closed down school for the first semester, and me being 18-year-old dreaded, like I was like, get me out of this house. Like, I don't want to go back to New Jersey,
Of course.
So I called up RISD, which I had gone into, and they were like, all right, come on down. We have a spot for you. Sign the papers when you get here. We'll figure out all the money stuff and whatever. And so I was planning to just go for a semester. And I don't know how your college experience was, but once you go through that first semester of college, you've made these lifelong friends already, right? Like, you've met your people, and it just felt like, every time you go to a new place, you have to do this thing where you have to reintroduce yourself, and you have to tell the same stories, and you have to meet the similar people. And it's like always this song and dance of meeting people over and over. And I was just so sick of it after that first semester that I was like, I'm just going to stay here. I'm just going to stay at RISD. I met my friends. Like, I found a good crew, and I'm going to go do architecture here because they have a great architecture school. So then in between first and second semester, there was a thing called winter session where they want you to take a class that's outside of your intended major. And it's a 6-week long kind of thing, which they don't do anymore. Now it's just 2 semesters. But so anyway, I got into the glass class, which was like intro to glass blowing. They take 6 kids every year. I got in, I gathered glass for the first time, and like immediately was like, wow, this is awesome. I just want to make pretty things out of this. And so for me, like, the craft of glass blowing and the immediacy of glass blowing was way more attractive than sitting behind a computer for God knows how long trying to design a bathroom or trying to design an HVAC system. Because, to be an architect, you're not necessarily going to be the architect, right? You'll probably be on a team, and you'll be delegated some small part of the project, and it might take years before you see any of the results. And for me, I didn't want to wait that long, and I didn't want to be a part of a team. I wanted to be my own team. So the glass offered this immediate response, right? Because glass blowing is so fast. There's not a piece that I work on for more than 30 minutes. And then it's done. And then I move on to the next one. And then I move on to the next one. And then I move on. And we do that all day long, right? For 8 hours a day. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, but it's short things, and you can see the immediate results of your actions and say, okay, that's a good one. That's a bad one. That's a good one. That's a good one. That's a bad one. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And,
what do you do with glass that is bad? Can you melt it back down? I don't know anything about glass. Never took a class on it.
No, most people haven't. And that's an interesting topic also, actually, which we can get into. But, so yeah, I have, right now I have 2 electric furnaces that melt glass, and, they run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, unless for some reason it breaks and we got to fix it. And we can take glass, and I buy clear glass. It's already been melted once. It's called Cullet. And I take that and I put it into the furnace. It melts overnight. We can blow it the next day. The stuff that's bad is usually has color in it, because most people don't want clear things, so we don't make a lot of clear things. So if it has color in it, we keep it separate, and twice a year we'll throw it into a different furnace and melt all the colored glass down and call it the recycled glass line, and it comes out this kind of like gray, blue, dark color. And that's just a new thing that I've been doing in a way to try and use the waste, because glass is such a wasteful, resource rich material. I mean, like, it's so bad for the environment. It's such a waste. And like the fact that what me and people like myself do is such a luxury. Like, we need to find ways to not just waste the resources that we've been given. So that's one way. Like, I used to just throw it all away, and I think I was throwing away around like 4,000 or 5,000 pounds of glass a year.
Wow.
Which just, glass doesn't biodegrade, so like it just sits somewhere, and it's non-recyclable glass, so it literally just goes to landfill and just fills it up. So if we can find a way to remelt it and use it, and then tell the story of, hey, this was made from scrap. People, especially up here in the Pacific Northwest, tend to gravitate towards that.
Yeah.
So that's been like a nice kind of revelation, being able to remelt some of it. But yeah, some of it you can't. Some of it, if it has like ceramic material in it, so like the inside of the furnaces are made of a ceramic material, and sometimes that stuff will leach off into the glass. It's called a stone. That stuff you can break it out, and then you can melt like the stuff that doesn't have any of the ceramic material in it. But the stuff with the ceramic you got to throw away because it's not compatible. It'll crack the glass. Mm-hmm. It's just not good. So,
and in respect to the forms and what you end up making, do you draw sketches for those kind of things, or you feel it out in the process?
Both, right? So it'll start with an idea in my head, right? I'll grab my sketchbook and I'll draw out a bunch actually of ideas, and I'll write them down. And then I'll go into the hot shop and use that as like a 3D sketchbook. And I'll just do, maybe an hour or two of quick, let's see what this looks like. This size, maybe we'll make it a little bit bigger, make it a little smaller, make it a little wider, make it a little taller. Because you can draw it a million times, but until you see it in your hand, you really don't know how successful it's going to be. And so I'll draw it out in the sketchbook. I'll say to the guys the next day, all right, I'm going to try this, 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 and this. I'll draw some chalk drawings on the ground, or I'll draw some chalk drawings on the shields or something, and then we'll do it. And then we'll have to wait until the next day to see it. And at this point in my career, like that's the most exciting part, is you still get that rush of like Christmas morning where you get to go into the shop the next day and you open up the ovens and you get to see what actually was made, especially if it's new. It's something that you haven't made before, and like that thrill, it happens to everybody if you enjoy making glass. It's kind of, have you ever done ceramics?
Yeah, quite a bit. Not at like a high level, but it sounds like what you were just describing sounds familiar in that sense. But I admittedly, those kind of processes I kind of stay away from, because I don't know if it's a lack of patience or just what I'm trying to do is a little different, but like the immediacy of drawing and just getting an idea out of your head and exploring that idea without any friction of a medium that's very particular, especially glass feels like really particular. I just I'm like not scientific enough about, like I'll do screen printing, ceramics, etc. But I find that I lack a kind of like, you got to be really meticulous about, all right, when I did it this time with this is the outcome. And
totally.
I guess I don't look for that in my art at the moment. But yes, I understand that kind of weird, with the drawing, only I'm pushing it forward. But with the process like you're talking about, you are sleeping in the middle of the night and then a kiln is running and then you get to see how a glaze talks to this moment. So it's more interactive with physical reality in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that weight, and like, it's that unknown for a moment. Like, that which is a gift and a curse, right? Like sometimes it sucks because you're just like, I want to see what that color looks like. How did that color react with this color? Or how did that shape look in this color? Right? Like
for sure
that, and you're just like, I can't wait to get to the shop in the morning. And like, I mean, for me, it's like that's like, oh man, I can't wait to get home, eat dinner, take a shower, go to bed, wake up so I can get back to the shop. And then we get to do it again, and then we get to, okay, we're like, I'm like, okay, that's close, or it'll all be trash. And you're like, okay, that was a waste of an hour. Right.
For sure. And that requires a kind of gracefulness and patience. And, one thing I think about a lot is the psychological impact of these different processes. And I think it's healthy to have a process like that. It's part of the reason I started working with wood 4 years ago, is I think there's a humility that occurs when you work with real material that talks back, that tells you no, that changes over time, that's living in a sense, especially with wood, as opposed to when you're holed up in a room and you're drawing or you're working on a computer and it's frictionless, and you can spiral into neuroses much easier, I think. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like it's just you and that thing, that idea. But I've always found, generally speaking, that people who work with these kind of materials are far more down to earth, even in a literal sense, than quote unquote conceptual fine artists. This is obviously a generalization, but you know.
Well, yeah, I think there's definitely something like the quote unquote fine artist is isolated, and yeah, I feel like you can get lost in yourself and you can't see the bigger picture. Whereas like if you're putting stuff out into the world for people, you get like immediate feedback from other people, whether like that's a way to judge, right? Is that a success? Is that a failure?
Sure. Yeah. And then you feel the love.
Yeah,
More
absolutely. Absolutely.
So
yeah.
It's kind of an interesting question. And I'm sure that there's no simple answer for you, but you know, if you were given infinite money, would you just make the fine art? Would you just make the commercial work, or would you try to find a recipe of 80-20 in one direction or 50-50? Like, do you have a sense of, because I think the practical utility of connecting with just like your mom or dad or just a person is really important and sustaining, even though it's lame to say. But, you know, there comes an age, I felt, that there's only so long you can deal with your own self-expression as an isolated feature of something. Like, obviously, there's expression within what you do commercially, within what I do commercially, et cetera. But I mean, like, just full-on, quote-unquote, expression, I think is kind of a dead end in some ways. Well, what do you think you would do if you had that opportunity?
So, I mean, it goes back to like why I started blowing glass, I think, and actually going through the program at RISD, right? So like I found glass. I was like, oh, this is really cool. I like the immediacy. I want to make pretty things. I want to make cups, bowls, plates, right? That's how I started my glass career. And then over the 3 years of being in the glass program where they're pushing you to make this conceptual art, by the time I got out, I was like, I need to make art, right? I need to be an artist. Like that's what I'm trained to do. And it took me another 4 years or so after that to remember, hey, you know what? Like, it's okay to make pretty things that don't necessarily have a concept behind them. And this is what I enjoy about glassmaking is these things these things that people are going to use. And so I think, to answer your question, is I would probably still do something very similar to what I do now, although I wouldn't have probably such a strong focus on, is this thing saleable? I think I would still make the things that I want to make in terms of function, but I wouldn't then try and refine it to be a production item. Like I would be like, that thing was cool to make. I'll make 10 of them.
Sure.
If it sells, cool. If not, I'll move on to the next one. So I think it would probably be like it would be a blending of, like, if I could make like fine art objects that people used, like if I could make, like, I think that would probably be like the ideal thing. And then I still have ideas of like, oh, it'd be a cool art project, or, cool sculpture, or, a cool installation. Like, and there's those ideas I still write down every once in a while. And I'm just like, oh, I'll get to that.
No, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, art school will fuck you up like that. Where you
It's true.
Because it's yeah, I'm not.
I don't really understand why.
You asked me how I felt about it. I think you asked me. You don't know how I feel about art school and my experience there, but
yeah.
It's a bit complex. I mean, I think I have a lot of opinions about it. I would never recommend it to anyone. I wouldn't put that on my conscience. But I'm not saying it was a mistake, and I certainly don't regret it. But it's like I just feel that I could guide someone personally better, more efficiently, for cheaper, with like some really simple ideas, and save them the time and the pain of putting on a performative persona to kind of like it. It depends. If you were super rich and you were steeped in certain culture and you went to museums when you were little all the time, and and your influences were the things they're supposed to be when you go to art school, and it all makes sense for your like essential being, then it's chill. But for when you're from the suburbs and you have certain values, like I find that it was just a detour that probably, you know, made some interesting detritus on the way, but it ultimately was just like a detour that was fallacious. It was just like a kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like I think, I don't know.
I agree. Like 1,000%, because like what you're saying, I tell everybody, like, they're like, oh, you're going to let Shoji's my kid. Are you going to let Shoji be a glassblower? And I'm like, he can be a glassblower, but he needs to have a plan B. I mean, a plan A. Plan B is the glassblower. Would I ever send him to art school? Absolutely not. And I don't think anybody should go to art school until they've lived in the art world for a little bit, because I mean, in art school, we would just call it masturbation, right? Like half the things you do there is just mental masturbation. Like it's only for you.
Yeah. And I think like if you really think about that idea, masturbation is not so far off from self-expression in the sense of like, or communication, right? It's like if someone was talking to themselves in a house alone. Okay. In essence, everything you make or everything you say is part of a conversation, and people are going to ignore fine art that is boring or not interested in them, and they should. And what is interesting about art school is oftentimes, at least I felt, that you're supposed to have some kind of derision towards others who don't try to like work really, really hard to understand it. Insanely oblique and conceptual nonsense, like especially lower class people. Which again, there's like this weird inversion where the people who actually make stuff are often those people. And I mean, like make glass, make carpenters, etc. Even the people who probably fabricate like, well, big, stupid, simple sculptures made of like metal or something, like really metallic shit.
Right.
Like those are just people who have actual skills, and it's an interesting dynamic that I'm not sure I figured out how to navigate. But for me, like seeing the art world, quote unquote, whatever that may be, I don't know if you can pin it down. It's like talking about like the Illuminati or something, but it is real, and it is real.
Yeah.
And you can look at your medium that you're naturally drawn to, for me, comics or drawing, and for you, glass, and just recognize that we're just the ugly ducklings in this scenario. And like and then you like look at the environment realistically and you ask yourself, do you even want to be there? And fortunately, you're not even tempted, because like for me, like there's no temptation there, making comic books or something like, it's not like being a painter where you actually might have a shot at making tons of money and being welcomed into the fold.
Into the art world, the quote unquote art world.
Yeah. And like from what I understood, because remember I did this show in Philly with these like 2 or 3 glass blowers, and they knew who you were just because you did glass. Right. And it made me realize like, oh, this world is super small, and it's so really small on the periphery of the fine art world, just like a ceramicist would be, you know, like there is still that way of viewing craft that is bizarre. But yeah, that was just a ramble. I don't even remember where I started.
I mean, there was an interesting thing in that like there's like the glass world, there's the art world, and there's like the craft world, right? So like in glass, it's a huge conversation. Like how can you make art that art is? So is it glass art, or is it art with glass? And like that was always a discussion in art school. I mean, this whole conversation kind of started with like the idea of like, would you ever go to art school, right? And I think like I am just as grateful that I went to art school as you are grateful that you went to art school. And I wouldn't be where I am now if I hadn't. But I don't think it was I don't think it as an institution is the best for creating real lives.
No, in fact, they intentionally avoid that conversation because they don't know how the fuck to do it. They don't know how.
That's why they're teaching, right?
Yeah. And no, I mean, all due respect to my good teachers, few and far between, but that's just probability, you know, like that's true of everything. High school, before that, you're going to encounter like 2-3 teachers who really change the way you see things. And some of them are great. And, but I just don't feel like if they were to like lift that curtain, that veil, it would become really obvious that you had no financial way of making back what you just spent. And everyone would just walk out of the room.
Right.
So there has to be a kind of game where like, oh, this has some intangible value way beyond the commercial. Sure, maybe. But also the amount of practical stuff I had to learn in the years after school is just kind of obscene, because it could have been taught, I think. It could have saved me a lot of time.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, you could have gotten further faster.
Should have just been a school, like an entrepreneurial school, where you learn how to do some art. I mean, that's like basically what you, at least in my experience, that's the last 10 years of my life, is like, how do you run a business? Totally.
And I actually I tell people all the time, because now the world that I live in, if we're talking about all these worlds, is the business world, and I just happen to make glass. And so I tell people all the time when I go to these wholesale shows or these trade shows, like the first 4 or 5 shows that I have done was my grad school, because I learned so much more in those 4 or 5 2-day periods on how to present things and how to price things and how to make things and how to talk to people and how to, sales and all these things that are actual, like, I shouldn't say actual relevant skills to life, but more, I guess, traditional relevant skills to life than if I had gone to, grad school for a MFA or something. And
for glass? Oh, you'd be out to lunch.
I know. Like, I tell people all the time, like, why would you ever go get an MFA, like, for glass especially? Like, just go live the world and go to these shows, because you can actually learn so much more from being out in the world trying to actually make it than if you just, if you go back into this insulated pod of people talking about, the brushstroke on the painting or whatever, or whatever it is that you make in art school these days. There's a lot more meaningful discourse out in the world that I'm in now, I think.
Do you find that having a child carries the meaning? How do I word this? Do you find that prior to having a child, you expected more meaning out of your work or art, and then after you're kind of more, I don't know how to articulate it per se.
I'm like jaded more, or not jaded, but maybe like more like, so my business is my first child, right? And I tell my wife that all the time. Like, I have 2 kids. You only have 1. I have 2. Like, my business is my first baby, and my child is my second baby. And I don't really treat the expectation of my business differently now that I have a kid, although I just need to make more money.
Yes, no, that makes sense. But what about art? Because I just find that in some ways, in those early years, in the 20s, et cetera, after school, art takes on an importance that I think exceeds its actual value. I don't know how to word that, but then you have a moment where the scales fall from your eyes, and because of something, like you live a genuine moment of life, you have a child, something horrible happens, etc., and life becomes reframed, and art becomes reframed, and you realize, like, art is very beautiful, very important, very impactful, but it is not God, and it is not the highest thing. It is not the act of creating life, etc. And so, the thing I often consider is, like, there's kind of a trope maybe where, like, once you have a kid, especially if you're like a punk musician, that your music's going to, like, just suck. And it's going to become kind of like, what would you say, lose its edge. And partially it could be about the money, like you're trying to make something more accessible because of the need to make something more accessible. But also, I do wonder if it's just the realization that
life is bigger.
Life is huge, and there's only so much you can control of it. And actually, the most poetic stuff is the stuff you can't control, like a child. And the art. Now, obviously, there are different forms of art, like, again, where they're more frictionless or et cetera. But the question really comes from a place of, in terms of priorities and hierarchy, how does having a child kind of alter the way you view art, or did it at all?
So interesting that we're talking about art, because for me, if we're I haven't viewed the things that I make as art for a long time, and I don't consider myself an artist anymore either.
That's good. That's honest. That's kind of, I'm almost there.
I consider myself a craftsman and a businessman, and I there's nothing wrong with that, titles or whatever. But I actually, I think, like I want to show my kid more art, right? Like I actually find like an appreciation for cool things that I find interesting, whether it be art or craft or design. And I want to like show my kid that. So I think in a way, actually, in the way that I view art, I think I have a greater appreciation for now that I have a kid, because I want him to understand more than I was able to understand when I was a kid, and like most people, right? Like most people don't understand why art is art. Like I had a conversation with my mom in art school. We went to the museum. There was I forget the artist, but it was a stroke, one paint stroke on a canvas. And my mom was like, what's the big deal with that? With the classic, right? It's classic. Like I could make that. And then my response to her was, but you didn't, and it was like, she still talks about it at that time, but like, that was my beginning of understanding of art. And I was in my 20s. Like how much cooler would it be if like you had an understanding of art at age 8, right? Or earlier on, like kind of goes back to what we were talking about. Like if that is how you grew up, like your appreciation or your understanding of like an art school or appreciation of art is going to be different than if you're from the suburbs and it wasn't really big. And so I guess, I would say the way that I make things is the same from before child to after child. The way that I make is the same. The process that I make is the same, because when I'm at work, I'm at work. When I'm at home with my kid, I'm at home with my kid. But when we're out in the world, me and my kid together, I want to go to museums. I want to go to art shows. I want him to express himself however he wants to express himself. And like, no, I want him to realize that life is art, right? Art is life. Life is art. It's all, you just have to see it. You just have to to slow down and see that everything, every single thing has been designed. Every single thing has a concept behind it or an idea behind it.
Yeah, for better or for worse, everything is manufactured. It's kind of like there's like a insane level of control in terms of that didn't exist prior. I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole. It's just like, as Marshall McLuhan put it, at a certain point we've reached the ability to make the earth as art. Like we can manipulate it, we can alter its weather, etc. Like we're only going to go further.
Right.
Where that ends up, I don't know. But I'm actually going to defend your mom and say,
yeah, why?
Fuck that brush, that brush stroke. No, totally. What I realize is like people like sacrifice. They like to feel the artist being sacrificed, and I don't mean that in a perverse sense. Like they like to know that you spent thousands of hours understanding a medium, or spent thousands of hours in a painting, because it's insulting to them otherwise. And it should be, in the sense of, again, if you're having a conversation and the other person's bringing nothing to the table, and they're uninformed, etc. I feel like that person has every right to be like, this is a piece of shit, or this conversation sucks. And especially when people, everyone's experienced working their ass off, I hope, in some sense.
Well,
So I do understand both sides of the coin, where it's like, it's almost like, a lot of modern art feels to me like it just exists because it could, which is not a good reason to do anything. Like, oh, we need to do this because it hasn't been done before. So, okay, let's slice the canvas open. Okay. More and more, I'm just like, this is all a disaster. And it's not like I don't make like traditional like oil paintings or something. But for me, I don't think it's necessarily about, is it aligning with tradition or what? It's just, is the artist being real about like human expectation in respect to like someone's taking the time out of their life to view this giant painting or something. And is it institutionally propped up, or is it like this thing is undeniably good? And the answer is usually the former when it's in a museum at this point. Now, with a medium like glass, like it is, or wood, these things are so beautiful that part of the equation is not even, it's kind of already done for you. Like the medium is going to be attractive. From there, it's like how you handle it and the forms you introduce,
Yeah, that's an interesting idea coming from like a non-glass person, because that is the argument is like, all right, like you're referring to glass art, whereas I know a lot of artists that use glass, and where it wouldn't necessarily be, well, this is already pretty, right? I mean, what I do, I hope people are like, wow, this is already pretty, like, but that's why I don't consider it art, because I'm not pushing any boundaries in a conversation. I'm simply presenting a design solution to your design problem.
Yeah. And would it be accurate that it sounds like, oh, my bad. It sounds like, going to school for architecture and what you were doing in high school, it sounds like you more so been in the design mode than the art mode for the majority of your life. And then you went to RISD.
Right.
And then like that kind of probably made your design more interesting, but it, it's kind of like a more circuitous path. So my guess would be that essentially you do crave some kind of functionality and connection. So did you have a moment of shame where you realized, oh, I'm not an artist right now? Or are you comfortable?
No. It was a moment of clarity.
That's good. No, you know what I mean? Like sometimes people feel like, I failed to be the thing, like the most useless thing. And now I have to. Well, there's a luxury to being useless, It's like, it's just like decadent. It's a decadent identity.
I mean, it's America in a nutshell, right? I mean,
to be an artist, I've never thought about that.
The way you're describing it right now, it just sounds like, where else in the world, right? Where like it's changing, right? But like, that's like the idea of America is like, we have just this freedom to make art, whereas like people are struggling all over the world. I mean, we're struggling here now too, but.
No, but it is true. You talk to artists in Europe and they're just like, they either have state funded grants or they're just not making art. It's from what I've seen, like it's really hard to find a business, to start a business and to just like make stuff like in the art vein and get by. So it's absolutely something to be grateful for. But what I mean by the decadent, the decadence of self-expression as a career is that obviously in the past artists had a very clear function and they made livings and they were craftspeople. I mean, the idea of historically speaking, I don't recall when the notion of like an artist really emerged, probably like post-French Revolution. Has to be something of an Enlightenment idea, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically, I mean, it might even be, sometime even after like the Industrial Revolution, right? Like when we had time, right? Well, I guess, the French Revolution with like the the bourgeoisie, right? I mean, that was probably the first time where luxury, time time was there was free time to express yourself. But even then, I feel like artists were probably like jesters,
Well, that's the weird thing is like the only way to make that claim is by separating the two, right? Like if you look at a good carpenter or something, it's maybe a stretch, but obviously they've integrated the artistry into their job. They didn't have to like free up time to do the useless thing on the side.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I'm saying useless in a good and bad sense.
Yeah.
So that kind of like compartmentalization is a little weird. And I think as the goal in a mature life is to decompartmentalize and then be like, okay, you know, there's a cynical take that making your hobby your business is like some kind of nightmare. It's almost like saying marrying the person you're in love with is a bad idea. But like, this is like a really immature notion, I think. I think there is a way to run a business with the craft you love and to do it successfully. And that's the dream. You know, like I think realistically,
totally.
Is there compromise in that? Of course. I mean,
I think it's also a certain type of person that has that dream. I think a lot of people who start a hobby and it turns into a business without an intention,
sure,
it sucks the fun out of it. But I think it takes a certain person that has the drive, that wants to just keep making the things they like making, and they know that the only way to do that is to start a business. So then you're aware, okay, we have to shift our focuses a little bit and make it a business, but then enjoy the part of making it a business also.
And you do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I will tell people every single time when they say, you tell people, oh yeah, I'm a glassblower. And they go, oh, that's so cool. You must like love your job. And I go, yeah, it's a job. Because at this point, right, it is my job. And there are days where I'm like, I don't want to do this today, but I have to. But the flip side to that is there's way more good days than there are bad days. And there's way more freedom in the way that I live my life than, say, if I went and got a corporate job. I'm not out here making a lavish life out of being a glass business. But what I do have is freedom, right? I can choose when I go to work, or I can choose how much I work, or I can choose, if I want to go on vacation, I don't have to ask anybody. If I want to take a day off, I don't have to ask anybody, but the downside is if I don't work, we don't get paid.
Right. Yeah. I mean, also the bigger thing for me is your struggle is in a direction that you have control of. There's so many people who have to struggle and work for massive faceless corporations, and their work is just kind of like, it kind of just dissipates, It's really quite tragic and hard to stomach, like for people who have potential. I'm not here suggesting everyone has like some beautiful potential in their life that they need to express, but I know a lot of people who have a lot of potential and kind of get stuck in that position. And a job is a job, and it's difficult, and the struggle is inevitable, but it's kind of like you were saying earlier, like you'd rather be in a position where you have control over that than part of some large operation. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the irony is you basically end up in a different form of shackles in which you then have to run your own business. And it's just a different set of, what would you say, challenges. And you're either into it or you're not. And that's why I kind of wish. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's why it depends on the person, right? So having employees, I don't know if you have any employees, but so I've had employees now for 7 years, going on 8 years now, like legit employees, W-2, I pay payroll taxes and all that stuff. And I've seen there's different archetypes of people, and some people are really good at being workers and some people aren't. And the ones that are really good workers are the ones that will just go get a job and and they're like living the quote unquote traditional routine life. And then there's the people who you can tell, okay, you actually want more responsibility, and you can see the bigger picture, and you will actually be probably better off as a business owner than a business employee.
Yeah, no, that's the same experience I have with it. And it's quite beautiful. It's like, it's a little more paternal in a sense where you have to realize like you're helping someone grow to leave you.
Exactly.
Pretty much.
And I mean, I tell them in you know, in my business, like I said, I got somebody leaving today. His is his last day, and he's an incredible worker, but he won't be a great business owner. He won't own his own business because he craves stability and he craves the routine.
Right.
But you tell him, hey, these are the tasks that you're required to do. Incredible worker. And I knew from the beginning, you know, there's going to be a time where you move on. And yeah, you definitely feel that, not ownership, but you feel that like, yeah, fathering, right? The parental, responsibility. That's a good word. Yeah. Of like, you know, I'm going to support you while you become this better thing until you move on and do your own thing. And then we'll become peers, right?
Or rivals. No.
I mean, but yeah.
It's funny how much, I mean, I like talking about business. I think it's interesting. And I think that's what's funny is, you know, a lot of these podcasts come down to that. It's about how did you take what you were doing in school or whatever, what you were just into, and practically apply it to actually make it continue until you were 30 something, 40 something. That's actually some of the more interesting stuff. So in respect to the glass, how has the business evolved from the first year to now, and how long has it been? 8 years?
Wow. So technically it'll be my 10-year anniversary in July. So my first ever retail show that I did was July 2014. That was the first time I ever put glass out there for sale. I was still working as a glass blower for another shop up until I think December 2015. So I've been on my own.
And you obviously didn't want to continue being employed in that fashion.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I was actually like financially ready to move on, but I was mentally ready to move on from that job. I went from being a full-time employee down to 4 days a week, down to 3 days a week, to 2 days a week, because, you know, as my business picked up, I needed more time to make my stuff, less time for them. Right. And then when I was working 2 days a week, I just remember waking up and being like, fuck, I don't want to get up. It's Thursday. I don't want to fucking get out of bed and go to my job. You know, I was like, you know, fuck it. Like, let's just take the leap after the holiday season. And, you know I've got trade shows coming up. I've got some business lined up. You know, here's what I think I need to make per month to be able to survive. And, I put together a little plan, and then I was like, all right, you know what, guys, 2 months and I'm out. And so in the beginning, my work is so different than what it was back then. And just the style of work that I make. So there's this, it's got to be the same in woodworking. It's got to be the same in ceramics, but there's this idea of high craft, right? And in glass blowing, the high craft is, can you make this cup super light, super crispy? And by crispy, I mean straight walls, 90 degree corners, no rounded edges, exactly the same every single time, right? So as a glass blower, that was what I strived for, because technique and craft took precedence over, maybe not precedence, but it definitely was on par with design in the beginning. And I always felt that back then, you make it really nice, people are going to buy it. And then this kind of goes back to the whole education of glass, like you were saying. Like, you don't know anything about glass. You and 98% of the world know nothing about glass. All they know is they can walk into IKEA and buy perfect cups for a set of 6 for $12, right? And so when you go out into the world and you make these perfect cups out of glass and you're trying to sell them, people are like, well, why am I paying $40 for a cup when I can go to IKEA and get them for $2, right? Mm-hmm. And it took me a few years of kind of like redesigning to come up with a product line where like, I had an aha moment, right? Where I was like at a show and I was making these jars that I really liked. And I transitioned from super crisp functional glass, like cups and stuff and bowls that were trying to be perfect, to I started combining cork and glass. Hey, John, we're ready. And like turning cork. So like I learned how to do wood turning, but instead of turning wood, I would buy chunks of cork and turn cork for these products. And it was super fun. And I'd make these jars and I'd make these cups, and it was just something that's different that, I thought would be very successful, but the shapes and the designs were still very, I would say, like could be mass manufactured. Not that that was my intention ever, but I just thought that that's what people wanted, and it was still a struggle to sell it. Although people started to enjoy that stuff, it was not selling as well as I wanted, and then I had this aha moment at one of these shows where I was just like, I got to stop making things that can be made in a factory. How can I make something that a machine can't make? So then it like the whole script flipped right then and there from glassblower as machine to glassblower, as not machine. And that was like the turning point for my business. Because once I started making things like that, people, I think, immediately started associating it maybe more with art. And were more willing to pay for that because they knew I can't go anywhere and get this.
Yeah, it's fucked up. It's kind of weird how, in the past, before machines existed, pre-industrial revolution, like I think craftspeople were meditatively seeking that kind of almost, like machine-like perfection, where it's like churning it out. But then after that, there's an existential crisis with that, and it becomes the opposite, where you have to re-inject the human into the process, but also not get lazy and just be like, well, your wooden table warped. That's just wood,
Well, it's what it does, right?
And so it becomes this much more of a balancing act instead of this just like, how do I become perfect, technically speaking? Same thing with drawing on a computer, like digitally. Like you're doing work to make it feel more warm and human, and you're working backwards. Whereas I feel like, when you're young, you're just like, I want to make a drawing that looks perfect and real, and it looks exactly like that thing in a very cold fashion. So that makes sense to me, especially with, honestly, like, China is getting really good at producing not just garbage, but like high quality things at ridiculous prices. And we have to deal with this all the time with woodworking. And, in some ways it's a relief because, like you said, you now have to bring yourself into it, basically. If you do believe in some kind of unique idiosyncratic vision of yourself, then it's necessary to bring that into the business effectively.
Right. Is that not bringing the art back into it? Which, it makes me think like, oh, maybe I am coming full circle now. Like I have, I went design, I went to the art, I thought about art, I went back to design, I went to craft, and now I'm like bringing art back into craft.
I think it's bringing this, I don't even know if I'm willing to say it's art. It's the self. It's the individual. It's, the individual being seen in a way. Like my screen print setup, I built all the screens. They're all janky and weird. And I built the washout area and the exposure unit. And the only time there's a problem is when someone wants me to do some shit that like a really refined shop could do. But when I just allow it to be imperfect and not so commercial, the results are wonderful. But it's basically when I forget the nature of the setup, the nature of the limits and the constraints that I run into an issue. And it's the same idea. It's just like there's no reason to compete within an efficiency model with individuals who are going to outcompete you. It's just a losing formula, and you're not doing something you like.
Right. Exactly. That's 100% correct.
So like there's this interesting, I don't remember the name of the book I was reading, but there's basically two models within business, efficiency or innovation. And the way you can tell something is an innovative model is people care where it came from. In other words, like efficiency models, I don't care where this sponge or this brand of the sponge, like, does it work and is it cheap? If somehow there's like some Dior sponge, which
it's
then
possible,
the person, then the person's like, this, I'm going to pay 1,000 times more because it's from this place, or the glass cup is from Gary Bodker, not from IKEA. The question becomes, like you're saying, it sounds to me like you stepped out of an efficiency model and then you stepped into an innovative one when you said, oh no, I'm going to embrace the imperfection and the process here. And it's not going to be, it's not going to be the conversation where someone walks up with the IKEA cup and says, this is $4 and yours is 40. What the fuck?
Right.
It's going to be a different conversation entirely.
Absolutely.
I think in America, that's the only play you have left. When you have developing countries that frankly can probably build shit equally as well, 10 times cheaper. So I think that's some advice I would give to people from my brief experience of business is like, and one thing to know with those two models is you can't sell off a business that's based on innovation because you are the thing. And so you find people who are really business people, entrepreneurs, et cetera, like stereotypically, they build stuff to sell it. And they avoid innovative models because innovative models actually have souls within them. And you can't, if you try to sell your business, you'll probably fail. You might have an apprentice who's really like good and similar and might work, but really
still it would change.
You're in it to the end.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like there's no retirement. You can't.
Thanks, Mike. I know that.
But that's like, you can't have it both ways. You can't have this thing that is is like holistic and self-expressive, but you can walk away in 5 years. I think that's unrealistic from a business perspective.
I mean, that's interesting though, because then I think I agree with your sentiment, but I think that then the question for me becomes like, what if you wanted to, or why are there so many efficiency businesses if like how do they stand out then, right? How do they make themselves an efficient business? Is that all just marketing?
There's so many things, right? Like let's say you're building a slab table. The weight of a slab table, the delivery, the installation, et cetera, like that's a variable that still matters in that equation. If it can't be shipped by Amazon for free, then there's still that. And then of course there's the complexity of the customization. Like, am I easy to deal with when you're trying to customize an aspect? There's different aspects to these things, but I think ultimately marketing is one facet. But if you really truly don't give a shit where it came from, then it is just pure efficiency, and the odds are you won't be able to compete with it. But I mean, it's more complicated than what I'm saying. I just think...
Right, you're boiling it down right now.
I'm boiling it down to show that, like, for me, it's not about art per se. It's more about your individual presence within your business. Like, are you invisible? There's people who make businesses where they're literally invisible. And I can't stomach that for whatever reason. Could be an ego thing.
You want to be visible.
I don't want to be like, I literally do not want to be seen as a human, like me smiling in a promo video. Right. But I want there to be my essence in the thing. Yeah. Otherwise,
sure. Okay,
I feel like,
what else? Then why are you, right?
Well, yeah. Why don't I just go get a job that pays like $150K doing some shit where I'm not present anyway? Right. Because there's 8 billion people and there's fucking crazy machines that can 3D print, and like it's a really, like, again, it's an existential moment of how are you present within your own business if you're an entrepreneur, and then what's the reality of just like, is it your whole life? Are you going to try to step away? Can you step away? How do you build it from the ground up in a way where your brand encompasses your ever-changing personality, if that's a thing you need to do, you know? Or is it just one facet of yourself? Like, those are interesting questions to me. And building a brand, which I hate that term, but like building a business isn't that different than building an art practice at all, I find.
No, I would argue it's exactly the same. Well, maybe not exactly, but I mean,
like, for instance, you may be goofy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, do you want your art to be goofy? And is it a failure of your art if you can't be goofy in it? I would suggest it might be.
I would think. I think the most successful businesses, brands, artists are the ones that embrace themselves. Because you are the best at being you, and that's what'll make the best things, right? Is you being you.
Mm-hmm. And that's, again, that innovative model to me. Like, I think in efficiency models, you are invisible, pretty much ideally, probably. And you're just focusing on, like, how do we tweak that penny? Like, how do we make that penny shift? I don't know how IKEA is pumping out $12 sets of 3.
Right.
If that's what it is. But
I mean, I don't know exactly the cost, but like, I think it's like I think there's like a set of 4 cups for $20 or $24 or something retail, which means they're buying them for, a quarter of that, which is like, all right, that's insane. But I know how they're doing it in a glass world. Like, there are factories to this day, not really left in America, but there's a couple, but most of them are overseas in actually, like, not developing countries. Like, you can go to Sweden, you can go to Germany, and you can get stuff mass produced in these giant factories because these factories are so efficient, right? To go back to your efficiency model, they know how to make glass so fast that they can make it for so cheap because they can make, 3,000 of them a day or whatever it is.
Well, because they're rigged up for it. So, like, that's something I realized in
infrastructure,
like, yeah, like, we'll do custom stuff all the time, and it satisfies us.
Mm-hmm. But like,
it's very inefficient. It's funny. There's almost some weird cosmic dynamic of, like, the more you enjoy it, the more that it's satisfying each and every quirk of what you want out of it. The odds are, like, you're just losing money based on that inefficiency. And I think there's a way to just solve that problem. I have not, honestly. Like, I think we'll need to recognize the value of your particular vision for you to be able to charge, like, insane amounts of money. Or you just got to be, like, kind of happy with those trade-offs, which I think are kind of just realistic. And you might have to consider the fact that one side of your business is somewhat more efficient and the other side is more experimental, and you're kind of just undulating between the two depending on the needs at the moment,
Yeah, I mean, I actually think in terms of glass blowing, I mean, you've nailed it with that phrasing, because as a production glass blower, I can't tell you how much I strive for efficiency and how many days or how many conversations I have with my team where it's about efficient, because that, like, the immediacy of glass, right? Like I said, we don't work on anything for more than 30 minutes. Most of the stuff we make takes less than 10 minutes, but it's such a non-forgiving material where if you make a mistake, it's throw it away, start over. And every time you throw it away, start over, that's an inefficiency, and that's just, it's a waste. So, and then being in the wholesale model that I work in, it's about producing and producing and producing and producing. So, like, to be efficient at producing means more dollars.
Right.
But then, like, then struggling to innovate as well, whether that's innovating design or new product or you know, it's definitely like, it's probably a Venn diagram, right? Like, where does innovation, where does efficiency, where do they overlap? And then maybe throw in your values in there also, and like find that center dot, you know, like that's probably where your success lies.
Yeah, I mean, not to get potentially cheesy with it, but, and I might mispronounce it, but you know this concept of ikigai?
Mm-mm.
It's a complex Japanese diagram that really solves this whole issue. It did for me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 4 main quadrants, and it's what you love doing, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you're good at. So if anyone asks me, like, if like I don't believe in following your dreams, I think that's like the stupidest idea. But I do believe in this idea, that like if you suck at something, please do not continue doing it, even if you love doing it, because I've seen that happen and it's really sad. And somebody needs to be your friend and just say, look, just not good at this thing right here.
Yeah.
And the one that I struggle with is what the world needs, right? Like I think in some sense, like literally, does the world need glass cups?
No.
But what does it? I mean, I think the world needs very intangible spiritual things, not more objects, probably. But do I make objects? Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, we don't need to get so wild with it. Like, what does it need? Yeah, people need some glasses. Okay.
Right. You need to. Yeah. Right. You need to eat food. You need to drink. Sure.
Yeah. So I think that's like a real nice distillation of the problem. And that's if I had to like help a young person, is what I would say. You know, it's like you could dream of being the next Michael Jordan when you're 35 and 6 foot tall.
Hey man, I didn't even get to 6 feet and I still dream about it.
So like, that's not sufficient, right? Like if it's not embedded in reality, you know, like that's not going to work. And in fact, I don't know if you read this guy, Matthew B. Crawford, but he actually kind of changed the way I saw a lot of things. And he has this interesting idea that like true liberty, true freedom is gained through being tethered to like like an instrument or a pen or a processes, like glass, like that. And that when you're actually at the highest state, it does resemble a machine. I think he uses a chef in a kitchen where like everything is super fast, super perfectly placed. And weirdly, paradoxically, the individual disappears, but in a more Zen sense. Like it's non-action in the sense of they're not even consciously acting. They're just one with the space. And that's like runs contrary to what a lot of people think is freedom, you know? But I think in art, it's very evidently true that when you are shackled to a particular process or way of working for a long duration, decades long, only until you've reached that level do you understand the true freedom of that. Like, I don't even know if I really began to enjoy drawing in a certain sense until I was like 30 something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like in the sense of, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like a fusion. We'll go DBZ with it, Dragon Ball Z. There's a sense of oneness where you're just like, I'm sure you experience this with glass at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing is you're so in tune with the material and the medium that you can kind of predict what's going to happen, but still allow the material to live. Maybe?
Yeah, it's no different than a relationship, right? Like, you don't want to suffocate the material so much so that it doesn't have a say or a decision.
Yeah.
And it's just like that balance between, for me, when it's drawing, it's more like the idea, right? Like, you can suffocate an idea or a narrative so much so that you aren't scared of it anymore because you know exactly where it's going to go. And then you don't even care about it. Usually you can't finish a book like that because it's so dry. But like, what's interesting to me is like, no one would talk about business from that perspective, right? Like typically people would talk about business in a kind of what I would say is like a hyper masculinized way, where it's like, how do we corner that market? How do we kind of predict its moves at every moment? And how do we capture this, that, or the other? And how do we repeat? How do we keep doing it? And how do we keep going? And I relate to that mentality as well, like gamifying it in some sense. But it runs somewhat contrary to like the more feminine and expressive nature of this kind of business.
I would say like what we are talking about and what we are doing is definitely the opposite of that, where when I talk about my business, it's letting it live and kind of letting it breathe and letting it almost dictate where it goes based on my experiences. Right. Like I have a plan, right? And I have an idea, and I have kind of steps A through D or whatever but there's never a point where I'm like forcing that issue. It's like, okay, let's do step A. And if step A leads to step Q, all right, then we're going to go over here. It's like those books where you're like, if you want decision B, go to page 36,
choose your own adventure. Yeah.
You choose your own adventure book. And it's like, I think maybe in that respect, like the business is its own entity, and it is the art in itself, right? It like, you can't just, it's probably the innovative business thing again, right? You can't distinguish the business from the products that it makes.
Yeah.
Right. Or like there's a similar ethos that the way that my business moves is the same way that my products will evolve.
Yeah. I mean, this is like pre-industrial revolution. This conversation didn't exist because there was no other way. Right.
Right.
Actually, there's this funny anecdote about like the Soviet Union where they wouldn't delineate between like which factory made which screws. And they would just be like screws,
Right.
And then they realized, so like all the good screws would be with all the shitty screws. It would just be like one big mess of generic screws. And then they realized like, oh, this like doesn't work. Like there needs to be a sense of, well, brands are in a good sense, right? Hopefully value signifiers. So like, your glass is different than, I literally don't know who else is making glass. In fact, like how many other businesses are doing what you're doing? If you had to guess.
A lot.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Who's your rival?
I have no rivals. Everybody's my best friend.
That's cool.
We are all friendly. There's definitely like arguments in the world, but like in Portland alone, there's one other shop in Portland that's like, I would say a direct competitor, but we share information. We talk about the numbers. We're transparent with each other. And, but are
you different enough where you're comfortable doing that? Or are you just so
100%, but we're also similar in kind of what we make, but I would say our design sense is different enough to where we can differentiate each other, but we're carried in a ton of the same stores. We're carried, we probably have a very similar demographic that we sell to. And then from Oregon to New Jersey, I have, 10 or 15 peers that I talk to that are doing a very, very similar thing. And then I know of, 30, 40, 50 other people brands that are doing a similar thing.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's not unlike, making a slab table or, making custom furniture, right? There's not a million, but there's enough people doing it to where it is a thing, right? And you'll find people all over. But then there's also different avenues for glass people. Like there's some people doing what I do, which is making home goods and functional home goods. And there's people who are doing like, teaching people glass blowing and, one-off experiences. And then there's people that are doing art. And then there's people that are teaching at the university level. And then there's people that are running nonprofits. And there's production glass blowers like up in Seattle, right? There's like Dale Chihuly's studio where he has a team of 30 people making art. And then there's like the Glass Eye up there, which employs 15 people that make their product line, which is probably, it's similar to the way that I run my business, but I would say their design is a little bit different. They're probably leaning more towards like a skewed of a higher demographic, older demographic that's looking more for like maybe more of a dated type of art.
Yeah. I'm looking at it. Wow. Very different.
Very different. Very different.
Very different.
I would say that like the process of making is the same, and the process of selling is probably the same. And we might run, our circles will overlap.
Yeah.
But
well, that's a good place to end it on. Like, where do you want to take it? Where would you ideally end up in like 10 years with the business?
So my goal has always been to, one, afford my lifestyle, and two, hire a minimum of 2 people full time to kind of teach and mentor and grow, to either eventually, move on and do their own thing and put their ideas out into the world, or stay with me for the long haul and be able to like provide a career opportunity for 1 or 2 people that, could retire with me. And then, I see like in my own kind of product line. I can't really speak to where I think it's going to go, because I like to just kind of let it live. And I don't really know, like, I know that I want to continue to make functional things that people are going to use. And like, that's kind of just like the core of what I do is I want to make a thing that you're going to enjoy looking at, but also enjoy using every day. So, the future, is like continue on the path that I'm on. I'd like to take the summers off, for being honest. It's too hot. But I've had these ups and downs. Like in the short time that I've been doing this, I've had incredibly successful years and I've had incredibly unsuccessful years. Mm-hmm. And I'd actually prefer at this point in my career to stabilize it to where I know, I'm going to be okay, or like, I know that, we'll be around next year, because, I don't know how your business is going, but like, when COVID hit, right, I went, oh shit, like, that's it. I was like, who's going to buy anything? All the shows are canceled. Who's going to buy anything? And I literally started looking at, all right, what am I going to do? Am I going to join the electrical union? Like, am I going to go become an electrician? Like, am I going to become a firefighter? And then and what happened was actually the complete opposite of what I expected.
Right.
And I had the most incredible 2-year run of my career where I was like, holy crap, we're making a ton of money. And then, and people are buying off my website, which is really the goal. And then the last year or so has gone down significantly. And, where people have gone back to work, their discretionary spending has gone way down. Their, inflation has gone through the roof, and it's becoming harder and harder to afford the luxuries that we make. Right.
No, same shit.
Yeah. So I think, if I could somehow stabilize it, but then, I always tell people, what I do is a luxury. It's not a necessity. And I know that. And so I think there's like, there's a couple values that I try and figure out where I can work them in is like, can I make this accessible for most people? Or do I have to go the other way? Because living in the middle ground is not a recipe for success.
Yeah.
You can't appease everybody, but, it's like there's a few people who, you're like, wow, vase is $900. Who's going to pay for that? But that's the thing. The people who can afford a $900 vase is like, you know, they don't care about money. And then there's the people who buy the majority of my work, which is under $50. And to me, like, that's way more interesting, is like, how can I make things more accessible to people? So I guess to answer your question in this long way about like, maybe the future holds like more accessibility for the things that I create to grow this bigger brand of Gary Bodker Designs.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You want to give the people a promo code? Just create one right now.
Yeah, sure. What's your podcast called?
Give them $5 off.
All right. What's it
called? It's called Blind Shovel.
Oh, it is Blind Shovel. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So we'll do code Blind Shovel, and we'll do 20% off.
Whoa.
Yeah. So use code Blind Shovel, 20% off. Check out GaryBodker.com.
That's exclusive right there.
That's exclusive.
Damn.
Yeah. Well, we've
been talking to you, man.
It was absolutely great talking to you, Mike. Hope we can talk again off the air.
Nah, I don't do that anymore.
Hey, you didn't even give me the disclaimer. Everything you say is being recorded right now.
Oh, it's all business all the time.
All right. Oh, appreciate the time, Mike. Appreciate it.
Right on. Bye. Music by Dory Bavarsky and Mingja Chen. Next up, we have comic artist Brandon Graham. Have a good week.